Amy Jo Nelson was born on March 11, 1978, to parents Pete and Pam. Amy unfortunately spent a good amount of her youth sick, and at the age of 14, she was diagnosed with lupus and APLS, also known as antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. The diagnosis came after she suddenly fell to the ground on the softball field. After that, it required a lot of hospital stays, sometimes up to a month, and she was given treatments such as blood transfusions, hyperbaric chamber treatments, and chemo. Amy stayed extremely strong throughout the ordeal and never let it get her down. In 1996, she graduated from Miller High School and earned a degree from Hocking College. She then went on to have 2 daughters, Sherrie and Allie, who are now adults. Amy's health troubles continued, and in July 2016, she suffered a stroke and lost her vision in one eye and hearing in one ear. After that, her family said she was never quite the same. By 2017, she was receiving palliative care for the APLS and lupus when an unspeakable tragedy occurred. Due to the loads of medications she was taking, it caused schizophrenia, hallucinations, and paranoia. It also attracted druggy friends who clung to her for her drugs. On September 28, 2017, 30-year-old Amy was found dead inside her apartment in New Straitsville, Ohio. It was initially thought that she had died of a drug overdose, but when her family showed up, they begged officers to have it investigated as a murder. They were spot on because even though the toxicology test found both prescribed and non-prescribed drugs in her system, the medical examiner discovered that she was actually beaten to death. For the last 7 years, the family has been seeking answers and even hung posters around town about her death. However, someone tore down half of them, and the person who did it was captured on surveillance. Unfortunately, it hasn't led to their identity, but those close to her are pretty sure they know who is responsible. Since her murder, her family has tried to help other women who feel trapped in abusive relationships. They even organized an auction and donated thousands of dollars to domestic violence shelters. Sadly, as of October 2024, her killer has not been arrested, and this case remains unsolved. Andrew Philip Powell was born to Debbie Miller Powell and went by Andy. In 2009, 21-year-old Andy was living with his stepfather, Billy Mack Powell, in a mobile home in Gaston, South Carolina, and was described as a very sweet and respectful individual. His mother, Debbie, didn't live with them, but was only a short distance away. On the evening of September 24, 2009, Andy was home alone when Billy was out drinking. Just before 11:30 p.m., several individuals kicked the trailer door in and restrained Andy's hands with tape. He was then dragged to the living room, where they beat and shot him to death. They then stole the keys to his truck, but not the truck itself. They also stole his PlayStation and the prized silver dragon necklace. When Billy arrived home at 4:30 a.m., he shockingly found Andy dead in the corner of the living room. He called 911 and Andy's mother, Debbie. By the time Debbie arrived, paramedics were already there. The killer or killers left his wallet behind and many other valuables. One thing that could explain this is that it appeared to investigators that Andy got free from his restraints and tried to fight back. During the struggle, he removed one of the suspect's masks, and that's when they shot him, which means they might have planned to steal more but fled after Andy was shot. A neighbor heard the gunshot and looked outside in time to see more than one person fleeing the house. It could also be tied to an incident that occurred 2 days before the murder, when Andy and Billy, who were in Orangeburg, had a gun pulled on them. Investigators believe he knew his killers and that the murder was personal. Andy was murdered in his home on September 24, 2009, and as of October 2024, this case remains unsolved. April Beth Pitzer was born in Arkansas on February 19, 1974, to 19-year-old Gloria Denton. April was described as a sweet and caring individual who made friends easily. When she was in her mid-20s, she got into some serious trouble after leaving a bar drunk with 2 other friends. A police officer pulled her over, and she was given a DWI, but things would get even worse when her 2 passengers were found with meth on them. The police then decided to make a deal with her. They would drop the DWI charge if she would work as a drug informant for them. Not wanting a criminal record, she took the deal. However, she had no idea what she was really getting herself into and would end up infiltrating a major drug ring that ran all the way from California to Arkansas. Unfortunately, at some point, she was compromised, and police advised her to leave Arkansas, afraid of what might happen if she didn't. So she moved to Texas and started a new life. That's where she met Chase Pitzer, and the 2 married. When she was 8 months pregnant with her first child, the DEA summoned her to testify in court against the people in the drug ring that she had infiltrated. In the end, about 30 people were convicted and sentenced to prison. She then became even more paranoid that the drug ring would catch up with her and kill her along with her baby. Because of this, she never let her daughter sleep away from her. She installed extra locks on the home and set up video surveillance. In order to cope with the stress, she began drinking heavily, which eventually led to a mental breakdown. She was then diagnosed with bipolar disorder. The stress was too much for her and Chase's marriage, and they eventually divorced. Because of her declining mental health, she also lost custody of her 2 daughters. She then met John Lopez, and together they moved to San Bernardino County, California. She and John eventually went their separate ways, leaving her homeless and having to stay on friends' couches. Some of those friends were Steve Wilkinson, Chuck Hollister, who went by Uncle Chuck, and Dan Dansbury, who went by Dan Dan. One night, Mark Killebrew found a mentally broken April on the side of a highway. He decided to help her and took her to live with his invalid mother, Barbara. The 2 became friends, and she even worked as her caretaker for a brief period. Barbara even convinced her to call her mother Gloria. Gloria was happy to hear from her daughter and sent her clothes and offered to buy her a bus ticket back to Arkansas. However, she wanted to stay a little longer in California with Chuck, but it would be the biggest mistake of her life. While at a gathering with Steve Wilkinson and some others, she noticed a woman named Brandy Brooks who was hanging with the group. Brandy's husband had been jailed as a result of April's testimony back in Arkansas. She decided to apologize, but all it did was make it known to the group that she had worked as an informant. Not long after, April spoke with her mother and told her about the encounter. Gloria was now terrified for her daughter and begged her to leave California as quickly as possible. However, after packing her bags and telling everyone she was leaving, she never made it to Arkansas and was never heard from again. She was last seen on June 28, 2004, in the 30,000 block of Caspian Way in Newberry Springs, California. When Gloria had not heard from April, she began calling Chuck's house, but there was no answer. She then received a call from Barbara, checking on how April was doing now that she was back home with her mother. That's when she informed Barbara that April never made it. It had now been 8 days since Gloria last spoke with her daughter, so on July 4, 2004, she called and reported her missing. However, the police didn't take it seriously and waited until July 16th to start their investigation. The last time Barbara saw April was when she was with Chuck. Gloria was eventually able to speak with him, and his excuse for not answering his phone was that he was helping a friend move to Oregon and also assumed April had taken a bus to Arkansas. He was brought in for an interview and strangely provided a conflicting story. This time, he said that April had left her stuff behind, including the suitcase she had borrowed from Barbara. He then told another officer that she went to live with Steve for a few days. He then refused to let investigators search his property and had his phone number changed. Interestingly, someone found graffiti in a truck stop in Oregon where Chuck said he was helping a friend move that read, "Looking for missing girl from Arkansas, 3 miles east of Barstow, I-15 highway." This location is near Chuck's home and the Barstow's mines. Unfortunately, Chuck has since passed away from cancer. If he murdered April or knew about the murder, he took that information to the grave with him. Steve Wilkinson is also a suspect because he had served time in federal prison for his connection to the drug ring that April helped bring down. There are also rumors that he hired Chuck and Dan to help murder and dispose of her remains. Steve and April had gotten into an argument over whether or not she stole some car parts from him, and it ended with him shooting her in the leg. We may never know if he's the one who murdered her because he died suspiciously in a plane crash on September 4th, 2015. Before his death, he was arrested in connection with a drug raid. After bailing out, he purchased a life insurance policy and then boarded the small plane that would take him to his grave in Daggett, California. The plane was being flown by his father-in-law, and he had 2 friends on board. They were heading to Texas to celebrate Steve's birthday. The plane landed in Flagstaff, Arizona, before continuing on to Texas. However, after taking back off, the plane went off course and crashed in Silverton, Colorado, killing everyone on board. The third suspect is Dan Dansbury, who owns Red Dog Mine, where Steve was seen the day before his death. Written on a wall inside the mine are the words, "3 people can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead." In December of 2005, a tour group found a flannel jacket that Gloria said belonged to April. The following month, in January 2006, investigators found the white suitcase, a black lace bra, and various other clothes that Gloria said belonged to her daughter. More of her clothes were found scattered across various locations over a 3-mile radius. A mattress and sheets were also found in the area and were stained with human blood and other bodily fluids. It is unknown if they were tested and connected to April's disappearance. Dan has also since passed away from cancer. While he was dying in the hospital, Gloria confronted him and he denied killing April, crying and saying that she was a wonderful person. Gloria found him believable, but rumors circulated that Dan suffered from dissociative identity disorder, or what used to be called multiple personality disorder, and Gloria wonders if this is true and if one of Dan's more violent personalities could have been responsible. Also, before his death, he told a very close friend that he was the one who killed April and that her mother is in the right place, she just hasn't been far enough. The Red Dog Mine has been thoroughly searched and no remains have been found. However, there are hundreds of mines in the area. April stood 5'9" with brown hair and hazel eyes. She has a scar on her elbow, a scar on her lip, a scar on the left side of her stomach, and a small round scar on the left side of her chest. April is missing several upper teeth and has dental implants to replace them. On the day she went missing, she was wearing hoop earrings and sneakers or sandals. She was last seen on June 28, 2004, and as of October 2024, this case remains unsolved. Robert Craig Stevens was born in 1966 to parents Bob and Neva. In 1979, 13-year-old Robert lived with his family in Tucson, Arizona, and was an honor student at Sunnyside Junior High School. He was a typical teenage boy who enjoyed riding his bicycle, but unfortunately, that would also lead to a horrible tragedy. On Sunday, September 30th, 1979, Robert decided to ride his bike to the nearby desert, as he often did. However, this time, he encountered a very evil individual and was never seen alive again. When he didn't return that night for dinner, his parents called and reported him missing. However, the sheriff said a search couldn't start until 24 hours had passed. On Tuesday, a search was in full force and helicopters began circling the family's house. 2 weeks later, on October 14th, about 400 yards from their home, Robert was found strangled to death under a mesquite tree. Unfortunately, they were unable to find the boy's killer and the case went cold. About a year later, in 1980, child serial killer Malcolm Joseph Robbins Jr., who was in custody in California for unrelated murder charges, confessed to killing a boy in Arizona in 1979. 8 years later, in 1988, the lead was followed up on, and an investigator from Arizona traveled to California to interview him. He confessed to traveling through Arizona with another man at the time of Robert's death. Unfortunately, the lead never developed any further than that, and the investigator personally felt that he was holding back information. He was ultimately convicted of 4 murders, including Christopher Finney, who he received the death penalty for killing. However, he would never make it to his execution date because he died from natural causes 42 years later, on January 27, 2023. Robert was killed in cold blood on September 30th, 1979, and as of October 2024, this case remains unsolved. Sherrie Lynette Stout was born on May 28, 1969. In early 2005, 35-year-old Sherrie was the mother of 2, but only her 1-year-old daughter, Curana Gilliam, lived with her in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Sadly, during the early morning hours of January 13, 2005, Sherrie and her daughter strangely disappeared. 4 years later, in June 2009, Curana was shockingly found living with a family in the Bronx. It turns out that when Sherrie went missing, Curana's father, Laquan Gilliam, gave her to a family and asked them to take care of her for a few days, but he never returned. Gilliam had been in jail on drug charges when he finally told investigators where his daughter was. The family had tried to track down relatives of Curana's but were unsuccessful. They claimed they were told her name was Corona Brooks. She was then sent to live with her mother's sister, Tamara Stout. In 2018, Laquan sent authorities on a wild goose chase by telling them that Sherrie was buried at a home in Red Oak, Virginia. It was extensively searched, but no remains were found. At the time of her disappearance, Sherrie Stout stood 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 130 to 135 pounds. She had black or dark brown hair and brown eyes and wore a brown blouse and blue jeans. Sherrie went missing in January 2005, and as of October 2024, she remains missing.